The Clash of Civilizations thesis, proposed by political scientist Samuel P. Huntington in a 1993 article, and later expanded into a book in 1996, posits that future global conflicts will be primarily cultural rather than ideological or economic. This thesis gained significant attention and sparked widespread debate for its bold predictions about the nature of post-Cold War global politics. Central to Huntington's argument is the role of Islam and its interactions with other civilizations, particularly the West. Here in this episode, we delve into the intricate dimensions of Islam within the context of the Clash of Civilizations thesis, examining its implications, criticisms, and relevance in contemporary global affairs. Huntington's thesis asserts that the world is divided into several major civilizations, which he broadly categorizes as Western, Confucian, Japanese, Islamic, Hindu, Slavic Orthodox, Latin American, and possibly African. He argues that the principal sources of conflict in the post-Cold War world will be cultural and civilizational rather than ideological or economic. Huntington contends that differences in cultural and religious identities will become the primary sources of conflict between nations and groups within nations. Islam occupies a prominent place in Huntington's analysis. He identifies the Islamic civilization as one of the major civilizations and predicts that its interactions with the West will be particularly conflictual. Huntington describes Islam as a civilization with its own distinct cultural and religious values, which often clash with those of the West. He highlights several factors contributing to this tension. Huntington points to a long history of conflicts between the Islamic world and the West, including the Crusades, colonialism, and the more recent geopolitical struggles. These historical grievances, he argues, have fostered a sense of mistrust and resentment that continues to influence contemporary relations. The fundamental differences in values and beliefs between the Islamic and Western civilizations are emphasized in Huntington's thesis. He argues that the Western emphasis on individualism, secularism, and liberal democracy contrasts sharply with the more community-oriented, religiously driven values of Islamic societies. These differences, according to Huntington, create a cultural chasm that is difficult to bridge. Huntington highlights the rapid population growth in many Muslim-majority countries, which he believes exacerbates social and economic pressures. This demographic surge, coupled with high levels of unemployment and political instability, can lead to internal strife and increase the potential for external conflicts. The resurgence of Islam as a political force in the late 20th century, exemplified by the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and the rise of Islamist movements, is another key factor in Huntington's analysis. He argues that this revival represents a rejection of Western political and cultural models and a return to traditional Islamic values, further deepening the divide between the two civilizations. Huntington's thesis suggests that geopolitical tensions between the Islamic world and the West will be a defining feature of the post-Cold War era. He predicts that conflicts will arise over issues such as terrorism, immigration, and the spread of democracy. The events of September 11, 2001, and the subsequent War on Terror seem to lend credence to Huntington's predictions, as they highlighted the deep-seated tensions between radical Islamist groups and Western powers. The Clash of Civilizations thesis underscores the importance of cultural and religious identities in shaping political behavior. Huntington's framework suggests that as people increasingly identify with their cultural and religious groups, they may become more resistant to globalization and more hostile to those from different civilizations. This has implications for domestic politics as well, where identity politics can lead to social fragmentation and conflict within multicultural societies. Huntington's thesis has influenced policymakers and scholars in considering how best to manage inter-civilizational relations. It calls for a recognition of cultural differences and a more nuanced approach to foreign policy that takes into account the complex identities and values of different civilizations. Some proponents of the thesis argue for policies that promote cultural understanding and dialogue, while others advocate for a more assertive defense of Western values and interests. One of the primary criticisms of Huntington's thesis is that it oversimplifies the complex nature of global conflicts. critics argue that reducing conflicts to a binary clash between civilizations ignores the myriad political, economic, and social factors that contribute to conflicts. Moreover, it overlooks the internal diversity and disagreements within civilizations, including the Islamic world, where sectarian divisions, ethnic conflicts, and political rivalries are prevalent. Huntington's thesis has been criticized for its deterministic view of cultural and religious identities. Critics argue that civilizations are not static entities with fixed identities, but are dynamic and constantly evolving. The emphasis on immutable cultural differences can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the expectation of conflict breeds more conflict. Some scholars have criticized Huntington's portrayal of Islam as reflecting an Orientalist perspective, which stereotypes and homogenizes the Islamic world. This perspective can reinforce negative stereotypes and contribute to Islamophobia, undermining efforts to foster mutual understanding and cooperation between different cultures. Another criticism is that Huntington's thesis underestimates the potential for cooperation and dialogue between civilizations. Throughout history, there have been numerous instances of inter-civilizational exchange, collaboration, and coexistence. Critics argue that focusing solely on conflict overlooks the potential for peaceful coexistence and mutual enrichment. The events of September 11, 2001, and the subsequent War on Terror brought renewed attention to Huntington's thesis. The rise of radical Islamist groups and the global response to terrorism highlighted the tensions between the Islamic world and the West. However, the global response to these events also demonstrated the complexities and nuances that Huntington's thesis tends to overlook. The International Coalition Against Terrorism included many Muslim-majority countries, illustrating the potential for cooperation across civilizations. The Arab Spring, which began in 2010, challenged Huntington's thesis by showing that the desire for democracy and political reform exists within the Islamic world. The uprisings were driven by demands for greater political freedom, economic opportunity, and social justice, rather than a rejection of Western values. While the outcomes of the Arab Spring have been mixed, they highlight the internal diversity and dynamism within the Islamic world. In an increasingly interconnected world, the rigid boundaries between civilizations that Huntington describes are becoming less relevant. Globalization has facilitated cultural exchange, economic interdependence, and technological connectivity, creating opportunities for inter-civilizational dialogue and collaboration. While cultural differences remain significant, they are often negotiated and managed in ways that Huntington's thesis does not fully account for. The Clash of Civilizations thesis, with its emphasis on the role of Islam and its interactions with the West, provides a provocative framework for understanding global conflicts. While it has been influential in shaping discourse on international relations, it has also faced substantial criticism for its oversimplification, determinism, and potential to reinforce negative stereotypes. In a complex and interconnected world, it is essential to recognize the limitations of the Clash of Civilizations thesis and to seek more nuanced and inclusive approaches to managing inter-civilizational relations. By fostering dialogue, understanding, and cooperation, it is possible to navigate the cultural and religious differences that Huntington highlights and to build a more peaceful and harmonious global society. Thanks for watching. Do subscribe to our channel, Sociopedia.